And when you said data governance, like a lot of people get nervous about that. So I just want to be clear that this is data governance is a lot just having a conversation about how you use your data, who can access it, when they can. And it's not always just a security thing. A lot of times it is for security and regulation and to make sure you're following those, GDPR and things like that. But also because you don't want to inundate your users with information they don't need.
Suddenly we've got AI sitting on top of data, sitting on top of the platform. So suddenly data quality has become even more important.
Yeah, okay, so I would say it's always been important. That's just my bias, right? So yes, but more publicly it has become even more important because we're now looking at this data not just transactionally, not just to get a quote out or to send an email, but it's to really derive intelligence from it. And if you are looking for something to give you insight and help you propel that next step forward, you got to make sure that it's good to begin with, right? That you've cleaned up what you're expecting to give the intel to you with, right? So if the data is a mess, if you've got duplicates, if it's not standardized, if it's not being updated in a timely fashion, you've got to ask yourself, what kind of intelligence am I actually giving my people? And is it more of a help or a hindrance, right? I think when you talk about AI, yes, you have to know what the end game is and what do I want to get out of it? What are the key things I want my business to benefit from? And I think that's a smart thing to do. But then you sort of have to take it way back to the beginning of how did I implement this solution? Where is my data? How is each team using the data? So I can then say confidently that I can now derive these results that I want from AI. So in my mind, and this is a long-winded response, it takes you back to that like the data governance conversation where it's yes about access and controls and stuff, but also more importantly, it's about having representation from each arm of your business saying, this is how I'm using the data. This is what it means to us. This is where we're pulling it from. So when you want to aggregate it, you bring it together to pull more information in. You have that complete, well-rounded business understanding of what your data is currently doing, the current setup. So you can then say, okay, how do we take it to the next level? How do we build on this house of information that we have? And I think I've said it to you before that the how you set up your org, the data that sits inside all the fields that you create, that's that foundation. And you're not going to keep building and adding on to a structure without ensuring that the foundation is sound. So to me, that is what data quality and the focus on it is providing for you is it's I now have a sound structure to go out into the world and grow my business and keep my current customers happy. So I started off as a Salesforce admin in 2005. And I've been immersed in the Salesforce community ever since moving over to the partner side of the business in 2008. And that's where I've been since. So I've been teaching data quality best practices and to different organizations of all different sizes. And I'm a certified Salesforce admin. I got certified in 2013. Um, what else? I was heavily in customer success. That's where I really started with this. And then I moved over into product marketing so I can not only help people understand the technicalities of the tool and how to implement it into their process, but now I'm on the other side of it where I can help them understand the value and the benefit and give them reasons why to step in. Whereas before, I was encountering people who knew, you know what I mean? They got it, they understood. My job was just to teach them and help them technically through it and, broaden their horizons a bit more. Now I'm trying to help you understand why it's so important because I've lived it for so long. I feel very passionately that if you're going to have a CRM, you can't go into it and say, okay, that's it. You need to go in and say, and what am I going to do about my data quality, as you're taking on that adventure. It's just, I think the two go hand in hand. And if they don't, it's not setting yourself up very successfully. So that's why I've stuck around.
So AI is all very exciting and everyone's talking about it, but it's actually forcing us to go and do the really boring things, which are foundational. We've got to get a well-documented process around
Mhm.
how the operation works. We need to validate some of the data and not necessarily clean up technical debt, but work out where the important fields are. Now is the time to put some descriptions on those fields if you're touching them. Because the other
Yeah.
thing we're discovering is that AI is very good at recommending suggestions, but actually, unless it has some description about a field, it doesn't know what to do. So, I mean, there's an opportunity here with the everyone's AI, great. So let's use this catalyst to actually get some of the basics put in place so we actually can move forward faster.
Yeah, and I think you see that a lot of times with when something builds on another piece of software, it's like, okay, you kind of got to go back and you start learning again in a different way because you just have a different lens on how you're viewing everything.
So many organizations already have uh, a ton of fields and duplicated data. So it almost feels like we need to go back, not quite to first principles, but we need to go back and validate around what are we trying to achieve, and what's the process, and where's the data coming from.
Yeah, absolutely. And, like I said, there's a lot of fields that people use, and sometimes there's overlap. So when we talk about duplicates, we think duplicate records, but we have to sort of change our thinking and wonder, okay, are there duplicate fields here that maybe are used by different teams for different purposes or even the same purpose that we don't know about? So there becomes this consolidation effort, almost profiling in a way. So when you look at your data and you profile it, you are reading the lay of the land for what it is, not for what you want it to be, but just what is my current situation. And going back into those data governance teams to say, how do you use this? Do you still need it? Is it relevant? Can we scale back, or is there a better, different way to do this? That's all going to be based on just how the data is set up and used and how it's been maintained too. So if you have data in there that isn't being used, right? Like you can run a report and say, show me fields that haven't been touched, or show me fields that are, the majority of them are blank that I'm not even using. So you give yourself that baseline of a conversation to start with, right? You don't have to go through every field. You can notice some of the anomalies and start the conversation there. So yeah, I think you just have to look at all the pieces that make the data accessible and give it meaning to make sure that it has the right meaning. And then of course the right standardizations, the right cleanliness, that it's being nurtured properly, the way you would nurture a customer. You have to nurture your data in much the same way to keep it healthy.
I think you talked about earlier, which is what's the need. So with AI, how are things going to change, and therefore, what do we think the output, or which fields do we need from that, and then we can work our way back down the food chain and go, where's the source of this data, and then get some validation. I mean, that's what validity is about, the validation of whether this data is correct. So you talked about data governance. Can you think about, or talk to me about sort of the structures you might want to put in place, or how I might go about this data governance, because clearly that's going to get more important.
Yeah, so I would find one person in each department. Typically it's the operations person you're going to be talking to, or a business analyst. So our admin and our marketing ops person, our sales ops person on the validity side, they all work very closely with each other because a lot of times those key roles will have insight into maybe what finance is doing or what product is doing. And we'll still need some representation there, but those are like the three where I would say go in and talk to them and understand your revenue operation processes and what's being used there with the data, so you can then say this is the important data that we're going to move over first. Maybe I mean, this is like really information that we're going to push into this AI, just even to test it, and they can help you figure out what that looks like. And to your point with like going back to the reports and how what field you're looking at, and all these are really great tactics to zero in on what you want to do. And I think sometimes too, people when they think AI, they're like, let's just go all in right now. And you might have to do a bit of a proof of concept to say, is this really giving me what I think it is? Because sometimes, especially with data quality, you don't know what's out there unless you're really looking for it. And testing an AI strategy can help you look for that, much like profiling your data, right? Like we were talking about before, going in, running reports, just seeing what's populated, what's not. This is sort of going to give you some of those insights as well, like what's being used. Because if you're building a process off a field that nobody's really updating, or they're not updating it as quickly as you think they should, that AI is lagging behind too. So you're going to, I think, one of the things with AI is you start figuring out where some of those gaps are in your process, and so it becomes a little bit more enlightening. And I see this about data quality too. When you go in and you start cleaning it up or you start looking at it, you get these aha moments like, oh, I didn't realize it was like that, or I didn't realize this field was empty, or we hadn't validated email addresses in a year, so it sort of forces you to just take a step back, look at everything that's going on, and then reassess how you're doing it. And like I said, sales ops, marketing ops, representation from each department, IT, I think those are going to get you very close to a very good process of where you need to go, or at least a nice starting point. And figuring out that path together of how to get to the best data possible, the best setup possible for the best insights possible that will help drive growth.
AI could cover any area of the business. Is there any place you would start?
My default is always sales, but sometimes also service, because those are the customer facing. That's the fast moving, you know what I mean, where you want that velocity, you want that turnaround to happen. You don't want any slowdown. So I would say test it there very acutely to make sure that when you do go full blown, that you have mitigated as much of the risk as possible. And that might be the marketing side of my brain too. We like to A/B test, see how things are going to perform, but also, the technical side of me is like, you don't just build a CRM or create a CRM and then unleash it to everybody, right? Like you have these conversations, you talk about it, and then you iterate from there. So the testing process is part of that iteration is, where did we fail? Where did it work? Where can we improve? Or who knows, maybe it's thumbs up and it works out just perfectly. But either way, I think you need to have that validation before you can confidently go to the rest of your business and say, this is going to give you intelligence instead of confusion, or mislead you, and have them really buy it too.
Yeah, because people talk about the human in the loop because we really don't want data put in here, it rattles through, and AI decisions made at the other end without some checks and balances at times. Because
Mhm.
that's I think the other concern, which is if we're populating AI with data that's coming from lots of different sources, someone might change the source unwittingly. I think we also need some processes in here to make sure that when changes get made, we've got some validation. So I think
Yeah,
is
absolutely.
that part of data governance, or do you think that's a different group?
This isn't the only thing. Artificial intelligence or augmented intelligence isn't the only thing that needs some checks and balances. Yes, we can say, let's automate and set it and forget it. But you don't really want to forget it, right? You want to check in on these processes and make sure. And I think as you're going through the planning process, you will probably notice things where you're like, if this changes, it will cause an issue downstream. So you sort of asterisk next to those and say, let's just be aware of when changes happen to these particular pieces because of the impact it's going to have downstream, and because we won't know. Like you said, it'll just be doing what it's doing based on the new information without asking, like, is this right? Because it assumes it is. So that takes a little, I think, finessing and just building into your process. But I see it with lead routing processes, right? Like we change how we get our data, how we understand our leads' behaviors, and then we have to change how we score that lead and how it gets routed and who it gets routed to. So it's very much in the same thing because, or the same idea, because when you're doing that, you're letting automation take over for you, and it's artificially telling somebody, hey, here's a lead for you, here's the score. But if you don't change that in the background, but and something else did change about the actual process, then it all breaks down.
I think now is the time to start running some of these projects to clean up, to understand the process, so you are ready for AI, rather than going, right, we've now got it. Okay, what project did I need to do? So, with that in mind, what do you think the two or three steps that someone should be taking right now with AI in the future?
So if somebody is in a position where they're saying, yeah, we're going to start looking at AI, I think the first thing you need to do is say, okay, let's look at our data and how we manage it, and just detail out, this is what we're currently doing. This is what we may want it to look like, but just current activities of how you're managing the data. And those should include deduplication, standardization, verification. And when I talk about verification, I'm very concise in the fact that, if you're worried about what to focus on, emails, phone numbers, the way you're going to contact somebody, right? Like make sure that's fleshed out and that those fields are populated. Um, so just really having an understanding first of how your data is in the system, what it looks like now, how it's used, like you said, with the reports, and just understanding that lay of the land. And then I would say, okay, what are we missing and how do we speed this up? Because whatever you're doing now may not be fast enough to keep up with how fast AI needs it to be done. Right. So if you have an admin that's going in every Friday and maybe running some dupes with the out of the box Salesforce stuff, or, doing some mass modification or mass changes with some of the out of box tool or some free app exchange tools, that's great. But it might not scale fast enough for you to adopt an AI solution and do so successfully. Let's see, a third thing, again, reaching out and talking to everybody and just being like, if this is what we want to do, how do we set the foundation to make sure that, like I said, we're not creating chaos, but we're giving a benefit to our end user? Because I think there's some skepticism, especially in like sales teams and stuff, that they're like, is this really real? Especially if they've had a poor experience with your data in the CRM before, if maybe it wasn't reliable or it caused an issue or they ran into a problem with it. So there might be that that need to really sell that the AI will work. And a lot of that selling would happen with you showing them, like, hey, we're really beefing up how we're managing our data, how it's being kept up to date and actionable for you. And the key piece that I think a lot of people miss is not necessarily what we as admins are doing, but what are your end users doing? How are they getting the information into the system? How quick is it for them? And to your point, when we talk about all these fields, how do they know exactly what fields they need to be actioning on to make sure that all these downstream processes are triggered properly? And maybe they don't need the full white paper on how your process flows. Maybe they just need a grid or a view, a page layout, if you will, that shows them when you are in this stage of managing an opportunity or this phase of solving a case. These are the fields of information that we need you to fill out and touch for sure, because then that is going to tell you what the next best action will be for this particular engagement. So I think those would be my top three is, and especially that last one, just making sure you understand how your users are engaging with the data is really going to have an impact on how effective AI is and how quickly, because like I said, you might have that admin at the end of the week who's doing some cleanup, but you probably also have those salespeople at the end of the week who are filling out the information that was supposed to be done through, just because they didn't have the time. We see that a lot. One of our products, Grid Buddy Connect, simplifies that input for people. And that's why another reason I'm so passionate about this, because when I see data quality and management on the demand tool side of my life, and then I see how people are interacting with it on the Grid Buddy Connect side, I'm like, these two things need to happen together in order for either of them to be as effective as they possibly could be, right? Because you want to give that end user the clean data. You want that end user to put in updated real-time information. So then all this stuff downstream, lead scoring, AI, automated emails, nurture campaigns, that they all work properly. So this isn't a foreign concept. It's just a new way of looking at it, and because the end result is going to be different, and it's not a result that you can actually go back and change and control. It is directing people on your behalf, so you have to make sure that it's directing them properly.
Let me try and summarize some of the things I've heard. I mean, data quality has now become urgent. AI, everyone's talking about AI, and therefore, this is the chance to use everyone talking about AI to go. I got to go back and get some basics in place. So, get data governance? Let's understand what the process is. Let's clean up the data. Let's maybe clean up some of the page layouts where they've got like 200 fields, and you really don't need that many fields. Use this as a chance to run a pilot project and actually prove some of the concepts so we can then sell it back into the organization. You can get started with all of those and get some benefits, even if you never used AI. There are lots
Mm-hmm.
of other things which are using that data. So you'll get some benefits just in terms of doing these things now.
Exactly.